Hello, and welcome to The Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On today's episode, I'm talking to the wonderful Zoulfa Katouh. Zoulfa Katouh is a Canadian writer with Syrian roots. A trilingual pharmacist currently pursuing a master's in drug sciences, Zoulfa is the first Syrian author to be published in both the US and the UK in the young adult category. When she's not talking to herself in the woodland forest, she is drinking iced coffee, baking aesthetic cookies and cakes, and telling everyone who will listen about how BTS paved the way. Her dream is to get Kim Nam-joon to read one of her books. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow is her debut novel. Zoulfa, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk about your debut novel. So please tell us a little bit about As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow.
Thank you so much for having me. This is just an amazing experience. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow is a YA speculative contemporary, and it follows this girl, Salama, who is a pharmacist volunteering at a hospital in Homs. And that's where the story is based in Syria. And so she sees all these civilians and protesters being wheeled in every single day and they're injured. And at the same time, she's trying to find a way out of Syria before her pregnant best friend and sister-in-law, Layla, gives birth. And because of all the PTSD that she's been through, it has manifested itself into hallucinations that seem very real, and mainly in a man called Khauf. And so with all of this going on, Salama has kind of lost that spark to live, or, she can't see the colors in the world anymore. And that is until she meets Kenan, who is one of the protesters, and he shows her that there's still color in this world, but the bombs are still falling and Data's due date is getting closer. And she has to make that difficult decision of whether she should stay in her home country or leave to a future that may not even exist.
Mm. Yeah, and it is like an absolutely heartbreakingly beautiful book. I read it in just 2 sittings.
Wow.
And I think it it really shows both the devastation and the realities of war, but also the humanity and the hope and the resilience that often we don't see when we think about war, when we see, articles in newspapers or on the television. So what was your journey to writing this book? What inspired you? What made you do it? What was the process like?
That's a very good question. So when I lived a majority of my life between Europe and the United Arab Emirates. And so, when you're in an Arab country, everybody knows what's going on behind the scenes. But then when you go to Europe or the West, all they see is, after the scenes, which is, the refugees coming into their countries. And so when I started meeting a lot of people in Europe, when I moved permanently back to Switzerland, was going to German school to learn German. And, in German school, in language schools in general, you have people from all over the world learning that language because they just moved to this new country. And so I was seeing a lot of various opinions and ideas regarding refugees. And when they would find out that I'm Syrian, they're like, oh, so what is happening in Syria? So before the revolution, a lot of people could not find Syria on a map. And after it became like that place where a lot of things are going on, but nobody knows what is happening.
Yeah.
And so I realized that, oh my God, people just see the faces of refugees and they don't see their backstory and what, made them become refugees, because it's not an easy decision. And so when I wanted to do something to help my people, to spread the word about what's going on, and that's how the story slowly came bit to bit together. From it, I wrote it within 1 year. It was in 2017 of NaNoWriMo, which happens in November, where you write a novel, a 50,000 word novel in November. And then I finished it, I wrote 50,000 words, and then I finished it the following year in August 2018. And then began the very long journey of editing, rewriting, finding an agent, finding amazing writer friends who helped make my story better. And then I was able to get my agent, and then we worked on it for approximately a year. And then in February of 2021, we were able to sell it within 4 days to Little Brown in the United States. And then Bloomsbury followed soon after in March of 2021 as well. And then amazingly, all the foreign rights, about 19 foreign rights came after that. And here I am sitting September 2022.
Wow, that's quite a journey. And I think what's really evident in the book is that it is telling a particular story is something that is trying to help shift the narrative and to shed light on sort of exactly what's going on and the impact that it's having on actual people. Because,
Exactly.
we'll read statistics, like we know that the Syrian crisis has caused the largest number of refugees in the world. Something over 11 million have fled, and that doesn't include the people that are displaced internally. Like, it's horrific, but being able to connect to it with stories is really important. And you mentioned as well that you're of Syrian heritage, your family is from Syria. So what was it like for you actually writing it? And I'm guessing you still had to do some research for it, because the book goes into quite a lot of detail of like what's happening with healthcare systems, how there's like raids on hospitals and attacks on hospitals, and then there's things about protesters. Like, there's a lot of things that are mentioned that I feel like the average person won't have insight into. So what was that process like, that research process like for you?
Yeah, so it was both very cathartic and very emotional. And so because like, last time I was in Syria was in 2009, I suppose. I was like 14, 15 years old. I was very young. And so writing it, I had to like come to terms with, my Syrian heritage and that survivalist guilt that you have of leaving your people behind and all that. And so from the research, there are a lot of stories that I personally know that happened to like friends and family. And at the start of the revolution, the main form of media was Facebook posts. Like they made Facebook pages and Facebook groups where the protesters would share videos and even live streams of the protests happening. And a lot of stories that happens to individuals within the community that don't usually make it to the mainstream media, like, BBC or CNN, because it's in Arabic. And sometimes it's, it doesn't get to the right media outlets, properly. And so as Arabs, we knew more because we would be like following these Facebook pages and groups constantly, like every single day, to find out more about what's going on. And I've read a lot of them when I was 16 years old when it happened. They still affect me to this day. And so I took a lot from the stories that I read on Facebook, from even sometimes the mainstream media would pick up a lot of things, like, for example, the healthcare crisis. I think it was the WHO who talked about it, about what was going on. And so there were some things that I didn't know that I learned from the WHO. And so I wrote all of that in one book. Yeah.
Wow. And so, yeah, I mean, so in the book, there's a small boy who comes in after an attack, and he's like really, really badly injured, and he's very upset, and he says, I'm going to tell God everything that's happened. And I remember seeing that it was like a picture or like a video that was circulating online a few years ago. And I just like, I found that it was very sad, but like, it was very, very sad. But like, and I figured that like so much of what you were saying was extracted from real stories that were floating around, and that was so nice. So so nice to see, and I think so important as well. But it must have been so difficult for you. I think it's difficult. Like, so I work in the charity sector, and I get a lot of reports in, and I find it difficult. And I don't think what I get is, it's like the tip of the iceberg. But I feel like your research must have gone really deep, and it must have been really hard. And also, like, it's connected to you, your heritage, your family, your identity. How did you look after yourself in that process? What kept you going?
So from the very first word that I wrote, I had this burning feeling in my chest that I want this book to be published, or at least one person reads it, or the very, very least, I finished this book. I see it through. And so it was that fire that kept it going until I was able to land an agent. But obviously during this time, I did go through very much lows where, my mental state wasn't doing very well because I was reading a lot of very, very sad things. And so I had to a lot of times take a step back and recharge. And it taught me patience, because I'm usually a very impatient person. So you want things to get, be done quickly. Like, why isn't this happening right now? But you have to teach yourself that, no, these things take time. And so I had to learn that. I had to put myself first, because if my mentality isn't doing well, then my book will suffer. And then ultimately I could hate my book as a result of it, because I'm not taking care of myself. And that is an advice I always give authors and writers everywhere, that take care of yourself because your book is a product of your mind and your mental health state. And so I'm fortunate enough to live in a place that is very beautiful with nature, which is Switzerland. And so nature for me is my recharge port. So I would, put my book aside, put my laptop aside, and I would go and I walk in nature and I would listen to music or soundtracks because I love soundtracks. Like Hans Zimmer's soundtracks are just amazing. And so take inspiration from that. And it helped me heal. Like it helped me heal myself and protect myself from, the dark things that I was writing.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine, I think, like the depth of what you were feeling, because, a lot of authors will say like, oh, I had an idea for a story and I feel like I need to honor the plot, I need to honor the characters. But this is, I think, so much deeper. And, you had a vision, you had a mission that was so much bigger than you and I and and even all your readers. Like, it's huge. And so, yeah, I think huge congratulations
Thank you.
to you, and such a beautiful book, honestly. But did you feel, what we often call the burden of representation? Because your book, you're talking about millions of people in Syria, and obviously your book is about one main character and a few others. But did you ever feel burdened by trying to represent the Syrian people and what's going on? What was that like for you? How did you manage that?
Oh yeah, I felt that a lot, especially because, I'm not a Syrian who lived in Syria her whole life. And obviously someone's mentality who's lived in Syria their whole life is different from a diaspora child like myself. And so I had to kind of like possess the body of my character, of Salama, and literally put myself in situations where how would she react? Because I would react very differently, and her likes and dislikes are different than mine. Her personality is different than mine. And so, during when I was writing, I felt that. But then at the same time, obviously, I doubt myself. I'm like, obviously, I know that I'm one voice, and there's millions of Syrians, and so every single experience is different.
Yeah.
But like as diaspora children, especially like marginalized authors, they feel like they carry that burden. Like they know deep down that it's fine, it's okay, this is just one experience, but then they feel like, oh no, I should be representing everyone, and that's my duty. But it's not. So you have to have a talk with yourself and be like, you're doing great, you're doing all your research. And even like for myself, like I know I'm Syrian, but I got Syrian beta readers to read my book and give insight, because like there was some stuff that I wrote, like some traditional food or some experiences that wouldn't happen in Syria, but for example I had them in Dubai. But it's different, living in Dubai, for example, is different than living in Syria. There's like different food or different drinks that people drink. So I was, for example, talking about karak, which I love. It's milk cardamom tea. That is very much prevalent in Dubai, but not that much in Syria. And it didn't even occur to me that Syria doesn't really have that. They have, for example, tea, like herbal tea, much more than cardamom milk tea. And so I had
karak is actually like South Asian, right?
Yes, it's South Asian. So there's a very big South Asian community, and they brought it to the United Arab Emirates, and it's so delicious. I love it so much. I miss it a lot. And so yeah, I had to, like, there was these small things that my friend was like, well, someone who's lived in Syria wouldn't really know about karak that much if they lived their whole life there. This was those small things that I tried to make it like more authentic, and I had to learn, as well as a Syrian, that I can write a better, hopefully more experienced character from their own country.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. I mean, that sounds so good. And I think involving Syrian people and Syrian voices in the whole process is so important, because that's the thing, that like you've told a story and you've rightfully acknowledged that you're not living inside Syria. And the whole point of the whole thing we want to focus on is bringing out those voices, because they're often so hidden and ignored, and they're not given the platform. So it's so, honestly, so great. So the book talks a lot about the impact on people's mental health, which I think is so great and so important, because often with all crises, it's the thing that gets forgotten or it's not talked about, but it's massive, right? It's huge. And I think, we have an understanding that maybe with like refugee communities that have reached the other side, or like they've reached safety in Turkey or the UK or Switzerland or wherever they are, and they're dealing with all the PTSD. But what about those that are inside Syria still? And I think with Salama, obviously we see Zoulfa, which is this hallucination that she has, but then something else, we discover this huge major plot twist that, and we realized that her PTSD is actually way bigger than she believed that it was, or that anyone believed that it was. Honestly, I think it's so important. But what made you decide to focus on that aspect, and how, because it's not talked about so much, how did you really find out everything that you found out about that for your book?
So actually, answering that question has to go back to who Zoulfa is. And so when I was thinking about this book, I wanted to give it this extra, more materialistic touch. And that's how Zoulfa came into view. So like in our faith, we believe that everything has life, from the sky to the trees, to the pebbles, to everything. So I thought that what if abstract notions also have life in them? And that's why Zoulfa came. And so I wanted him to represent, or even Salama's mental state to represent what is going on, because you read stories about children in Syria who now draw drawings of bombs or their parents dead. And and when they do it, they're not doing it while they're crying. They're just doing it because that's all they know. And they would, for example, draw the different types of shelling that would fall on them. Or they're built, like now they can differentiate between what bombs are falling. Like no child should ever know that, and that gets swept up under the rug. So I wanted, instead of it being this abstract thing that people don't really know much about, and they just like, it's that big bad monster that you don't see, I wanted to make them apparent. And that's what Zoulfa is, and that's what Salama's mental state, portrays, because this is happening. Like Salama, yes, she's a fictional character, but this is real. Like the mental state, these children have been through even more than hell. Like no child should ever see that. And so I wanted to give them something more substantial, so people can understand, bring the story closer to readers' eyes.
Yeah, and I think everything that every part of Salama's character that you formed just showed us the severity of the situation, because she is only 18 in the book, and she was a pharmacy student at university, didn't even get to graduate, and is all of a sudden has no choice but to work in a hospital, and she's doing surgery without anesthetics, and they don't have enough medicines to prescribe people, and there's no blood, and so she's having to give her own blood. And it's just like, yeah, and to imagine that an 18-year-old is doing that. Like I was 18 over 10 years ago. I can't imagine having to make some of the decisions that she has to make. And also, like a lot of people in Syria, Salama has lost family members. Her brother and her father have both disappeared. Her mother passed away, like very, very tragic. But I think everything about that it opened up the door to understanding so much about the crisis, which I feel like is a very welcomed addition to the world of literature.
Thank you so much.
We haven't seen that nearly enough, and I'm very, 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 very pleased. And I just want to touch on Keenan, actually, because I loved it. I love that character. It's so sweet. But he is Salama's love interest, and it's very sweet because she's like, hey, I know you from somewhere. And then he's like, no, but we haven't met. And then we realize that they were supposed to meet, and it feels like, oh, it's destiny. But it's not perfect, right? Like it's not a perfect love story. And it's in the middle of war. But he does, as you rightly said at the beginning, he helps her to look beyond so much of the suffering that she's witnessing. And she, I think, desperately needs that. But yeah, what was it like for you developing the character of Keenan? And also, I just think it's so important to show that although there is so much difficulty and hardship going on, that people are also still living their lives, and they're still experiencing a range of emotions, and they're still falling in love and wanting to get married and having families.
Oh, yes.
And a war doesn't stop everyday life, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So talk a little bit about that love story, please.
So writing their love story was like drinking a hot chocolate in the middle of winter. It
Oh.
warms you up. And so it was one of my favorite things to write because I'm a huge lover of romance. I love it so much. And so writing it, and I was so proud. I am proud of like how Salama and Kinan's relationship, because like I wanted to, when I wrote Lemon Trees and I finished it, I thought I wrote this for the people who don't know much about Syria. I wrote it for Muslim girls to see themselves, outside what the media represents them. And I wrote it for myself. Then when I was writing my Instagram post of telling the world that I have a book, my book's going to get published, I realized I also wrote it for the Muslim boys who see themselves in the media as misogynistic, abusive people towards their families, and just not really great people. As we usually see in the media, which is okay. Yes, sometimes it does exist in our societies, but that's not the general. That's not the general idea of Muslim boys. And I wanted that to be in Kinan, that he is kind and he loves his family and he's patriotic to his own country, and he loves his mother, as you can see, like from when he talks about his mom. And I was so happy that I was able to write a soft boy Muslim love interest who you don't really see much about. You don't really see much in books. Hopefully in the future we will have more of those. And so their love story was this, light in the dark. And I took a lot of inspiration from Everlark, Katniss and Peeta, who I'm a product of my time. The Hunger Games shaped who I am as a person, And so I loved how Peeta was to Katniss. And actually writing Salam and Kinan's relationship made me understand Katniss even more. I was like, oh, damn, this is really cool. Like understanding a character that I read, years and years ago. So you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, I did not draw that parallel. But now that you said it, I was just like, he is definitely the Peter to Katniss.
Yes. Yeah. He's her, what was her dandelion in the spring. That's the line from Mockingjay.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that for Muslim children and for myself and for people all around the world. And so their quiet moments were this precious moments that existed between the loud moments, and they amplified the loud moments. When they have these soft moments, it makes their time even more precious and more limited, and you're scared, like, is this going to end well? And so it was hope. Their romance was hope, and I very much enjoyed writing it.
Oh, it's really lovely. And I think, I mean, you're absolutely right on the male representation as well, because we often, I think, especially because I'm a woman, like I think so much about the negative portrayal of women. And also, even when we think about war, we often think about war in terms of men fighting and men making sacrifices. And obviously your book also shows that actually, well, women have sacrificed so much. And we know in history, actually, if we delve into it, that it's women that have done so much. But yeah, the male representation definitely, I think, is really important, because we don't see enough, as you said, kind men do exist, and they should. That's what we should be striving for. And he obviously was, the decision that he made to leave, it seemed so impossible for him. And there's that scene where they're on the boat and they're eventually leaving, and he's looking back and he's crying, and it was so, I really felt for him, because he was so adamant that Syria is his home and his identity, and he didn't want to leave. And that not wanting to leave is so integral for people to understand, that actually it's not a choice, right? It's really not a choice.
And the thing is, like, a lot of you see the general idea sometimes with the refugees is that they're weak, because they don't have anything. But that's not true. I mean, it takes like immense amount of strength to actually leave a place you've known your whole life, venture on a boat that's too small for anything, and in a journey that you may not even reach. Like that is strength. Or like sometimes there were people, they went through the boats, but there were others who were running towards the Turkish borders, and they would get sniped, and that is I mean, no words. I'm at a loss at words, because how can you look at people who are risking their lives to live and then you call them weak. You know, it's sad.
It's very sad. And so why do you think actually that like the narratives that we have of refugees and of Syria in general is like why is it so limited?
It is it is limited, which is very weird because there have been refugees from the dawn of time. There have been
Exactly,
revolutions from the dawn of time. And you know, I know a lot of people call the Syrian Revolution the Syrian Civil War or the Syrian War. But we never call the American Revolution the American War or the French Revolution the French War. So why is Syria any different? That's something I'm very interested to know. But refugees have existed. I mean, we've had in World War. There was a time also. This is something I knew about just recently, like a few months ago, that there are Swiss refugees who went to Egypt because Switzerland was going through a drought and they couldn't plant anything, so the soil wasn't giving, and so they went to Egypt, and our lands, alhamdulillah, they have so much to give. And the fact that there were so many Swiss refugees in that place that they called it, the road is called Swiss Road till now in Egypt. And people forget that. They forget that, you know, refugees have been existing for a very long time ago, and then they also forget that it's only these circumstances that this is happening to a certain group of people and not to others. But time changes, you know, and hopefully no one will ever be in that situation, but you never know, right? Exactly. And so you would want someone to be empathetic. You would want someone to understand where you're coming from, to know your story, to help. So as human beings, we owe it to one another to be like that.
Definitely, absolutely. I mean, and that point that you just made about about the Syrian revolution / Syrian war, like why do we call it war and not revolution? And I do think it's we haven't heard nearly enough actually about the revolution side of things, which is the call for a free Syria. And maybe part of that is because of the magnitude of the actual like the war side of it, which is the attacks by the government, right? And so maybe maybe that's got something to do with it. I don't know, it could be, but it's and maybe also because when we use the word revolution, what comes to mind is something that has succeeded in completely overturning, and we're not there yet, you know. Obviously we live in hope for free Syria, but we're not there yet. Exactly. So it will be interesting to see, you know, if we are all alive in like 50 years, how this time in history is reported about and what words are used. I think it will be really fascinating.
I agree.
For people to see. So I want to talk a little bit about you and writing and reading. Did you always want to be a writer? Because I had to look at your Instagram and stuff, and I can see you've like done you also do like drawing and
thank you.
and you seem to have been writing bits and pieces before as well. So did you always want to be a writer and an author?
I've always been a reader ever since I learned how to read. But I didn't know that you could be an author if you didn't graduate with an English literature degree. Okay. And so I only realized that much later in life, like in my 20s, in my early 20s, late 19s, said, wait a second, I don't need to have an English degree. I mean, I can write my stories. And so I realize now, by the way, that if you have a good grasp on grammar, but you can learn to be better at grammar, because my grammar was atrocious at the beginning. I was mixing present and past tenses in the same sentence. It was very, very embarrassing. But you learn. You know, I'm very yes, I cringe when I think about my early writing, but it made me be the writer that I am now. And whatever I write now will make me a better writer in the future. And so I had to start, and it was, for some weird reason, it was kind of difficult because writing is so personal. It is therapeutic, but it's also coming from your mind. So you are your words. If somebody doesn't like your words, it kind of feels like they don't like you. And so writing was difficult at the beginning, but then I slowly eased into it. And so I began in my early 20s. I wrote my first book, which was a YA dystopian. And it taught me how to, like, they say that writing your first book teaches you how to be a good writer. Like your first book, majority, except for some exceptions, usually sucks. Like you're just learning how to do it. And so mine did. Like my first chapter was 50 Word document pages, pure monologue. Whoa. No dialogue whatsoever. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, yeah, it was very funny. But now I laugh about it. At the time, I was like, oh my God, this is a masterpiece, gonna feel like this is gonna crash bookstores, like it's gonna be amazing. But now I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? But it helped me become the author that I am now. So I finished that first book, and Lemon Trees was actually my second book. So I had taken like a couple of months off because I was like moving permanently to Switzerland, meeting people, and that's when I got the idea for Lemon Trees and I started writing it. And even the first draft of Lemon Trees was not good. It was not good at all. It was there was a lot of pain, and it was something that I had to learn myself. As you said at the beginning, that yes, there's the aspect of war and what's going on and the death, but these people are actually living their lives. They have love and hope, and they want to, they have their own ambitions and dreams. So their life isn't stopping because of what is happening. That is something I had to learn because I didn't see it that way, myself, because I was only seeing the pain. And so I only wrote pain in my book. But then afterwards, when I was sending it to friends, if they came back with feedback like, this is too much, like it's happening, but you become so desensitized by the end that you don't feel it anymore. So you have to live in the real life moments, which is reality. And I had to learn that, I had to learn that by rewriting Lemon Trees. And it really made my book so much better, when I realized that, oh my God, why am I, putting them in this one box of pain and suffering when they are an entire galaxy? So yeah, hopefully I was able to do that with Lemon Trees.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, so Lemon Trees is a YA.
Yes.
And and so what is the kind of like target age range in your mind for the book?
So when I first started writing it, my target range was 15, 16, 17. And I got some comments from multiple people who were like, oh, why don't you make it adult? Because, it's kind of like gory and, you're talking about trauma and stuff. And I realized that we're underestimating teens, they can take so much, and they're very, very smart. And in their teens, you learn empathy. And that's what I wanted to do, make their bubble a bit bigger so they can see like the other side.
Yeah. And so how did you, because I mean, although I think 15, 16, 17-year-olds are incredibly smart, and actually I think it's a great time to have literature that forces you to change the way that you think and to ask questions and to create that environment. I think it's such a great age. But obviously writing a book for that age is different to writing a book for even like a 20-year-old or 25, I don't know how old you are, but like a 28-year-old or even older. So what was that like? Like, how did you make sure that your book was speaking to teenagers?
I had to put, as I said, putting myself in Salama's shoes. There were times where I had to remind myself, she's 18, she's not 25, 26. So I had to go and rewrite a couple of things. And then because she's also forced to grow up, she's forced to become an adult. Sure. But then you've got some lines where she acts maybe kind of not childish, but like kind of like her age, like when she, gets flustered or, shy, or she thinks of that life and she's so frustrated, she wants it, like, that those moments where she allows herself to be the teen that she is. But then it contrasts against, the darkness that she has to live in and be forced to, operate without anesthesia. And it's difficult, but it was a fine line to write because I didn't want to make her seem older than she is, but at the same time I had to give that respect that yes, she is going to act older in some situations, even like, and then this also contrasted against Kenan's siblings who act childish and not their age because of the emotional repression that they go through. And that is true. A lot of children of war and of trauma go through emotional repression. And so I had to also give them their right, that because I had a friend who told me, oh, like, I think it was Lema or Yusuf, I don't remember. And she was like, they're not acting like a 9-year-old, because at first she's like, I have a 9-year-old cousin and they don't act like that. I'm like, yeah, your 9-year-old cousin didn't, live through war. This is different with her. And so they need time to heal, but they're not in a place where they can do that.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting that the character of Salama is the thing that helped you keep the book kind of in line with teenagers, which is so good. And I really hope that teenagers do pick it up and that they do take something away from it. I can imagine though that a lot of them may need someone to talk to about afterwards and those things, and we hope, we can hope that like schools can facilitate that and parents and families can facilitate that as well. So you mentioned before that you kind of, you grew up reading The Hunger Games, but who are your sort of favorite authors, and who do you find inspiration from?
So obviously Suzanne Collins, one of my all-time favorite authors. I love Fergus Sepetis's books because they also inspired me a lot with Lemon Trees. They were kind of like my origin story. So I don't know if you've read Salt to the Sea or Between Shades of Grey that she wrote. They were definitely recommending them. They're amazing. And so she talks about stuff that happened in World War II that not a lot of people know. Like I didn't know. I mean, in World War II, I know about the Nazis, Germany, the UK, the States, but I didn't know, for example, about the Serbian concentration camps that happened, or Stalin, and she writes about that. And it was very, very interesting to know about tragedies that happened during that time that not a lot of people know about, and she wrote it in a fictionalized story. So Salt to the Sea, Between Shades of Grey, amazing books. I love the way she writes. It's amazing. And one of my other favorite current authors is Tracy Dion, author of Legendborn, and Deborah Fillet, author of Blood Scion, which is both amazing fantasy stories, like 100% recommending. Oh, and of course, SKLE, Love from A to Z, love her. She's my friend and an amazing author that I look up to.
I haven't actually read Love from A to Z, but I have it on my bookshelf. I will be picking it up soon. And I haven't heard a single bad thing about that book. Like, I think people love it, and just think that it's a beautiful love story, like a halal love story as well, which I feel like is
oh my god, it's you're so lucky that you still haven't read it. I mean, to get that first reader feeling, I would love to have that again with Love from A to Z. And I would suggest reading it, like if you want, you could read it now, because Love from Mecca to Medina is coming out next month. And it's just a beautiful continuation of the book. Made me cry so much. I was lucky to get an early copy from her. And from the title, they go to Mecca and Medina, and I was like, oh my god, like I was there. It was so beautiful.
I will pick it up soon. I will definitely. Okay, so so my my question is, why lemon trees?
Yes, so I love that question because it's layered, and so for as a background context, the original title was "By the Time You Read This, I'll Be Dead," and that's how I queried it. As you can see, when I told you that I wrote pain, and I had to learn not to see above the pain. That was the pain, and it's reflected in the title.
But that title kind of sounds like a horror or like a murder mystery.
Yes, yeah. But I wanted something like to grab, you stand out, because thousands of people are querying agents every single day, and you want to stand out. So I was like, it's true, because it's happening to people. They do die, and it grabs their attention. So maybe make me stand out, but at the same time it wasn't the right title at all. So I was looking for something much more hopeful, and then I came across a Syrian poet. His name is Nizar Qabbani. He is very, very famous in the Arab world, and he had written a poem verse that said, "Every lemon shall bring forth a child, and the lemons will never die out." It is much more beautiful in Arabic, but this was the best I could do with an English translation. Still pretty, I hope. And so he wrote that poem about Syria, and the lemons are a symbol of hope. And then there's also another saying that every house in Homs, where the story is set, has a lemon tree. And so these lemon trees have existed for centuries. I mean, Syria is one of the oldest countries in the world. Damascus is the oldest city in the world. So you can imagine what these lemons have seen, and they still persist. And so they are resistance, they are hope. And that's what I hope this book is.
Yeah, definitely. That's so lovely. And that poem is referenced in the book a couple of times, and yeah, it's absolutely lovely. And so just my final question, what do you hope for yourself going forwards with regards to writing? Are you working on anything? What can we expect from Zoulfa?
Yeah, I like that question. I love writing now. So my second book is the other side of the coin to Lemon Trees, and it deals about what happens when you reach safety. So a lot of people are like, oh, so they're safe now, but you're met with people who don't really want you to be there, and others who help you. So it shows like the different shades of the community, people who come together and people who reject other people. And so it takes place in a fictional city in Washington, because I love the ocean, and the ocean does play a role in the book. And so it is a double POV, a first generation immigrant girl and a refugee boy, and they meet at a school that is in a white dominant suburb. So it's like rich, and they trying to do something nice for the refugee boy, that they get him into their school and, like a program for him. But then you meet people who, some accept you, some don't. And so it deals with identity, racism, knowing that you are enough. And for me as a diaspora child, that was very healing to write. And of course, as always, love. And there's obviously a halal romance, which I'm so happy to write. And essentially, it is a healing story. So hopefully, I'll have more information about that soon.
That sounds lovely. I cannot wait. Thank you so much for your time today. It has been so lovely speaking to you.
Thank you for having me. This has been amazing. I loved your questions.
Thank you so much to Zoulfa for such an insightful conversation. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I would really appreciate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the podcast.